Oh, it is now.
Welcome to PALS.
Well, there's only a very select group, I might say.
Yes. We have a very select group of attendees today. I would like to thank those of you who are here for coming. So this is the PALS session in IETF 99. This is actually the first PALS session that we've had in a few IETFs because most of the work we've been doing over the email lists. Anyway, I'm Andy Malice. This is Stuart Bryant right here. We have David Sindicrope in the first row, who is our working group secretary. And David has kindly volunteered to take our notes. This is the note well. I would like you to note that this is a new note well. It's not the same note well we've had for a long time because there's a new RFC 8179. And if you have not yet read the new RFC 8179, I highly recommend that you do. Okay, this is our agenda for today. We have 3 items on the agenda. We have the chair's report, which I've started. We have a draft on use of Ethernet control word being recommended, and we have a draft on the Yang data model for pseudowires. Any other additions or changes to the agenda? No, okay. There were blue sheets going around. Where are the blue sheets currently? Okay. Could you please start the blue sheets or continue the blue sheets so that we get everybody recorded? Okay. Now, in terms of what the working group's been doing, the working group has actually been extremely productive. And this has been, for the most part, all by email. We've had 2 new RFCs since the last IETF, 8184 and 8185. Since we started PALS by combining the old L2VPN and PW3 working groups back in 2015, since November 2015, we've actually published 14 RFCs. So we've actually been very busy, and we've also kept our AD, Deborah, here in the first row, extremely busy. And we would like to thank Deborah for all the support that she's given to us. We have 2 more drafts that will be published soon that are currently on the RSC editor's queue, the PAL status reduction and VPLS PIM snooping. We have 2 more with Deborah right now in IESG review, PAL's status reduction and P10P pseudowire LSP ping. One is currently out for expert review, and the other is waiting for AD follow-up. And that's it for our drafts right now. We have no other working group drafts. However, that said, we do have 2 individual drafts on today's agenda that may become working group drafts. And there may be at least one. There may be a PALS draft resulting from work in the DetNet working group, where this may be a DetNet draft that's currently under discussion with the folks in the DetNet working group. For those of you who have not been following DetNet, you might want to. If you have an interest in pseudowires, this is just a little editorial comment. DetNet is doing some extremely interesting work on deterministic networking, and one of the portions of the solution that they're discussing currently in the DetNet working group is the creation of what's being called a DetNet pseudowire, and so it's work that's of interest to the folks here. So if you've not yet been following DetNet, you may wish to. Anyway. With that, that's the end of my slides here, and we're going to go on to our very first presentation. So I'll cue those slides up right now.
Okay, so
Next slide, please. So the IETF, the PALS working group, well, the PWE working group, in fact, took a decision when pseudowires were first deployed that some equipment of commercial importance was unable to support the Ethernet control word, and so we would allow an option where Ethernet pseudowires could run without it. At that time, there were no Ethernet MAC addresses issued by IEEE that started with 0x4 or 0x6. Pat tells me that there may have been some others that I didn't understand, but certainly 0x4 and 0x6 were not officially allowed. And so it was considered it was safe to deploy Ethernet pseudowires without the control word. And hence the drafts, the RFC saying that the control word for the Ethernet pseudowire would be optional. I remember lots of arguments at the time. So next, please. So what's happened since? Well, the IEEE RAC has issued Ethernet addresses started with 4 or 6. In fact, I think they've gone from a sort of linear policy to a kind of a random policy, is what was said to me. And because presumably the others are depleted, there's an even higher chance of getting a 4 or a 6. Presumably the non-4s or some non-4s or 6 are depleted, and so
right,
yes.
But it's irrelevant.
Right. Anyway, this makes the initial assumption that there could be no confusion between an Ethernet packet without a CW and a control word and an IP packet invalid now. Although it's actually been invalid for quite some time, it's just that we didn't really talk about it very much. At least none of the vendors really spoke about it. So carry on.
Yeah, so I looked, and at least in 2010 they had already assigned some values with 4 and 6. So it's actually been for quite a while,
right,
that they've been assigning more broadly. And the other point was that it's always been legal to use any address in the local address space.
Okay.
So you could have had local addresses that started 04 and 0, that started with 4 or 6.
Okay.
From the beginning of time.
Right. So the important thing is that our assumption has been invalid. Was invalid at the time, and has subsequently been seriously invalidated due to changing policies. So what some equipment was doing was to implement some complex proprietary methods to try and figure out whether it was an IP packet or a pseudowire packet, and they rely on sort of heuristics, and or they unrely on heuristics depending on your point of view. So operators have been seeing packet misordering and drops in the network. I'll explain why in a moment, and they've expressed some concern to us. Next slide, please. So why does the misordering happen? Well, it happens in ECMP situations where what people were trying to do was to load balance their pseudowire over a bunch of different circuits in the WAN. And what they would do is they would look below the MPLS label stack, which you're not supposed to do, but they would look there. They would say, aha, it starts with a 4. Or it starts with a 6, and so it must be an IP packet, and then proceed accordingly. And they would try and load balance on the 5 tuple, which of course might not be anything of relevance. In fact, it could be a sort of a random field in the protocol, depending on whatever the protocol was. Next slide, please. Why is it a problem? Well, Ethernet has an invariant that there will be no packet misordering. I don't know whether any protocols really use it, but it is an invariant. And I understand there are some protocols.
If I may, yes, there are indeed quite a number of protocols that, going all the way back to when people did terminal emulation over Ethernet. Right. And there was no sequence number or anything like that. They made the assumption that packets would be delivered in order.
So next slide, please. Well, the control word was always designed to prevent this problem by putting a 0 in the first nibble. 0 cannot be a 4 or a 6, and then what we've done is effectively hijacked IP version 0, which was an interesting discussion at the time. So we hijacked 0, we hijacked 1. I think beer is hijacking 2, aren't they?
Mm-hmm.
So we've been stealing IP version numbers, and I wonder when someone's going to complain, I suppose.
Well, actually, the early IP version numbers have now been officially retired by IANA for these purposes.
Right, but I mean, the point is that I suppose they might have been needed for something like defining a new IP version at some stage. And anyway, we have been stealing them. Version 0 is probably never deployable as an IP version, and it's how we distinguish between a pseudo-wire and anything else. Next slide, please. So why don't we just mandate the control word? Well, we looked at this some time ago. I remember there was quite an energetic discussion about this when we did a study on what the deployed base looked like. And in particular, we did this in the context of should we mandate a control word based OAM approach for VCCV. And the point was made that there's a huge deployment of pseudo-wire PEs, and some of them still can't do it, and others presumably would need to be reconfigured, and that wasn't very popular. So if it's impossible to mandate it, then we can at least start the migration process. So the next slide, please. So the key piece of text in the draft is the text in blue that's on this slide, which is that we update RFC 4448, which is the Ethernet encapsulation design, to state that when an ingress PE and the egress PE support the Ethernet control pseudo-wire control word, then the control word must be used. But can we go to the next slide, because I've got a question for you. I said must there. I'd originally intended to say recommended, hence the title of the draft. But we as a working group need to decide which of these we're going to say. Do we say must, or do we just say recommended? And that's a question for the people present. Otherwise, I'll toss a dice. Anyone have any views? Do we go all the way to must? Anyone care?
Yeah. Dave?
I can hand you a microphone.
We actually do have people listening on.
Yeah, that's why I wanted to use the mic.
Yeah.
So this is Dave Sinekrop. Just a question. I mean, we've discussed this ad nauseum in the past,
Yes.
and the recommendation was turned down at that point because of existing implementation.
Right.
I imagine those implementations have not disappeared. So then what do we do when we make this recommended or must?
It still says, but when both the ingress and the egress PE support the Ethernet control wire, then we either say it's must or it's recommended that the control word be used. So if you don't support it, then you're not bound by the prefix of this sentence.
And okay.
So you presumably would not deploy it.
And therefore in danger of passing and running into the problem, right? I mean,
sorry?
In other words, if these existing implementations, if the problem is manifested in these existing implementations, I mean, should there be some stronger language put in place?
Oh, what you mean that you must implement it?
It is strongly recommended that implementations not using the control word be phased out or replaced or updated or...
We don't say that, but if people want us to add this, then what's the consensus of the working group?
We have another comment first.
Ignas Bogdanas, a comment on this about equipment. When this problem started to appear, basically the platforms which had no support for control word were dominant at the time. The average lifetime of a platform in the field is 5-6 years, and most of those platforms which did not support it at the time, they are long gone. Today, virtually everything that supports pseudowires is able to support control word. It's not a problem anymore. Certainly, you will be able to find older platforms in the field that make an exception for this. But basically, the playing field has changed. As it was an exception to find a platform which had support for pseudowire in, say, in 2008 timeframe, now it's an exception to find a platform which does not support control word for pseudowire.
So do I add, so this covers all the cases, this text I've got up here covers all of the cases, right? If you find yourself with one of those pieces of equipment, you can still deploy it. If you find yourself in a situation where you've got control word available, the text currently says you must use it. So the only thing we have to now deal with is, do we add the sentence that says the continued deployment of equipment that does not support the control word is not recommended?
That's probably a question for the market to decide, and that equipment will be phased naturally.
Right.
It will simply die off, and therefore, well, my personal vote would be for must.
Yes.
Stating the exceptions which you have in the coming slides.
Yes.
That there might be cases where it is not possible or it might break things, but overall, you must use it when it is available.
Okay.
Okay. Cool. Pat has another comment.
Yeah, I prefer must.
Okay.
And I think that the draft makes it clear that the consequences of not using it can be pretty severe.
Unfortunately, the next slide gives some problems with using it, as we'll get to in a moment.
Okay. I wanted to mention also that the MAC address randomization, which in the local address
Yes.
space, which has been something that's been tested here, and is being increasingly recommended to be used for Wi-Fi, at least. That also uses the whole
Right.
local space, so that also
Right.
uses the 4 and 6.
Okay. Could you send me a
quadrants.
note, so in case the minute taker doesn't get it, so that I remember to add that piece of text in the draft?
Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
you.
Sure. Yeah, because that's another usage of
Right. Thank you.
that increases the
kind of
likelihood.
makes the case compelling. Himanshu.
Himanshu from Siena. So sorry I'm late. I didn't get to the previous slides and all that. But since I guess you are asking the working group whether to for the language, right?
Yes.
And I used the word. I would like the word recommended rather than must. And I think we've gone through this before, right? And there was a lot of the operators came, and there was, I think Andy, you wrote a draft or an RFC that talks about the advantages of using control word and all that stuff. But we do have a lot of legacy deployments that does still today that does not use the control word.
So the point is,
Ethernet.
Himanshu, that the text says if both the ingress and the egress support it, then you must use the control word. If ingress or egress do not support it, you are still compliant with the RFC. The context of the previous discussion was OAM, where we were going to try and make the OAM only operate in a control word context. So that would have invalidated those platforms. This doesn't invalidate those platforms.
I don't know whether it was just the OAM. I think it was the whole reason for using the control word was that all the ECMP was getting screwed up because of the MAC address starting with the 4, right? And so that was the driving factor at that time, as well as OAM. Yeah, people wanted to use the control word as the channel 1. But I think even here, as far as the language is concerned, not both, but at least if any one of them, right? So if both, I guess this is the right language. Because if any one of them is not supporting,
Yes.
then yeah, you shouldn't.
Yeah,
use it.
right. So where both support it, it says you must use the feature. That's what we are proposing.
Right.
If either, the unwritten text is if either don't, then you just ignore the rest of the document.
Right.
So we don't invalidate the deployed base that can't do it. Although, as Ignas was just saying, that deployed base is getting smaller and smaller by the week.
I mean, the whole L2 VPN and everything is with the advent of EVPN.
Yes.
There's a less traction with the L2 VPN and the pseudowire and all that stuff. But for the so I guess this is okay, but I think I would just leave it alone. People know the importance of having to use the control word. So
well, clearly they don't, because a lot of the operators have been fairly sort of vocal on the list.
Yes. I don't know if mandating would make any difference. So anyway, I said enough.
Glenn Parsons, I think mandating makes a difference. I think it's important for the IETF to be clear that this protocol must be used in a way such that it does not invalidate a significant MAC address space.
Okay.
And to me, you must say must.
Okay.
On the first point. And now on the second point, on equipment that does not support this, I think in addition you need to add to the document that equipment that does not support this is not recommended or something. So I think you need to say that. Or if you don't want to say it's not recommended or that it's broken, then you need to say that it will cause significant problems because it invalidates part of the MAC address space, and you're not going to know what pieces you're going to get. And you might want to do special stuff like you were talking about before, but that's a kludge,
right.
and I wouldn't recommend kludging.
So would it be reasonable to say we recommend the phasing out of equipment that can't support it?
Yes.
That sounds fairly.
Yes.
I'm getting a shake behind you.
Well, I agree with that, but someone in the back of the line may not.
Right, Ignas next.
Ignas McDonald's. So a comment about the operators being aware of this. They are surprisingly unaware of this problem. This problem surfaces periodically in various operations mailing lists, and it's always the same story. My new shiny router is dropping packets. What's wrong? Or I just deployed this new pseudowire-based architecture and I get random drops. It might be seen that from IETF perspective this is understood, but that's a tiny fraction, and basically the intersection between IETF community and operators community is really tiny. And this problem is really badly understood in the field. Therefore, having this documented and having a reference that we can point that this specification of BCP probably describes the problem and here's the solution is certainly the right way to go. But this is an education question for the operations community. So this is to answer Himanshu's comment that no operators are not well aware about this.
Himanshu.
If I may, just to that point, there has been quite a lot of discussion about this on the NANOG email list at the very least.
Many lists.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But I mean, that's an old discussion. I mean, so by now, it would be very surprising if operators do not know about this. So I kind of, well, anyway, as far as the equipment and the recommendation, I don't think any of the IETF RFCs talk about, you might as well then say, use the Cisco's equipment or Juniper's equipment. We don't write RFCs like that.
Well,
right?
wait a moment. We do say things like we don't recommend the deployment of equipment that only uses the old security encryption systems. We're fairly robust about trying to get rid of security systems that don't work, Dave.
No, I mean I would dispute that that you cannot put a language like that in an RFC, because that's not what the IETF. I mean, you can say this is how it is. This is recommended, or the language that you have used here. But beyond that, going and saying, well, you should phase this out, or you should just use Cisco router or something like that. That's not the place for the IETF RFCs or something like that.
Dave is next, and then Greg.
Okay.
Okay.
My only point, yeah, so as far as the language goes, we can craft some of the language so that it's perhaps a little gentler and say that, equipment that doesn't support this, it's strongly recommended that equipment be upgraded to support it or enhanced to support it, if not necessarily replaced. And if we insist on the replacement language, I can go buy shares in a forklift company.
Okay. Greg Mirsky, ZT. I believe that, and that was already mentioned, that all other pseudowires, they have that control word must be used. Okay, so I don't really see why we cannot say now that Ethernet control word for Ethernet pseudowires must be used if both ends are compatible.
That's what we just said. That's what it says. The question that I think we got consensus on that.
Yes.
What we haven't got consensus on is what do we say about trying to migrate away from this equipment?
No, that is, I would agree with Himanshu is that they will get to this conclusion themselves.
Okay.
Deborah?
Speaking as AD, we definitely want in our documents to be very clear when we have identified problems with using something. I mean, it's just as they're pointing out, the security consideration sections now in our documents, where you have to be very verbose to say if there's problems identified, and we should be doing this in a constrained environment, because it's our responsibility to inform the users of our specifications what the problems are. And this is definitely an identified problem.
Yeah, but I think that's why this first sentence, the first paragraph is fine, but I think going beyond that is going too far out, like Glenn was suggesting. The other thing, as far as what Ignace said, is that the packets are dropped, unknown packets are dropped. That's not the case.
There's another fault in a moment that we're going to get to.
It's an out of sequence packets, and you get that TCP stuff. But anyway.
So on the old equipment versus new equipment, I don't think there's a way to have addresses that start with a 4 or 6 not sent to old equipment, because it may do something poorly with it. So I think it's necessary to have some warning in here. I mean, the point that operators may not be aware of it, I think it needs to be made clear. That was the indication when the rack was made aware of this, because an operator had complained to the rack about that the rack had a problem by assigning numbers beginning with a 4 or 6, because their router now didn't work. So it was the IEEE's problem.
Right.
It's not the IEEE's problem, right? So the problem is with here, and I would support some indication that the old equipment should be phased out or should be replaced or something softer, just to indicate that there is a problem that's been recognized.
This Ethernet-based services, pseudowires, has been humming for a long time. So that one operator coming and complaining at the IEEE about address assignment, I think now, to tell you the truth, I think this problem, probably the routers don't even do the 5-tuple based on the end of label, end of stack label thing. I think there is a fat pseudowire, there is an entropy label, there is a lot of things that are already there. So this notion that the end of stack label with the 5-tuple, let's do ECMP on that. So those routers are also going away. But anyway, I strongly disagree that we should put any language about not using those equipments or anything like that.
Noted. Shall we move on to the next slide?
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay, so but there is a downside to this, as Ignace has pointed out to me last night. The first one is obvious, and I didn't really thought, is that the packet gets 4 bytes bigger, 4 octets bigger. And there are deployments where the MTU size is tightly constrained, and those deployments would have a problem with the inclusion of the control word. It seems to me that they might be better off fixing their MTU problem than trying to figure out why they're losing random packets in the network. There are also middle boxes, apparently, that analyzes pseudo-wire traffic without first analyzing the signaling, or maybe they don't see the signaling. They make assumptions about the packet format, and they work on the assumption there's no control word, and they're just not going to hack this. They are not, however, really conformant to any of our specifications.
That's
so
correct.
they'll have to learn. Next slide, please. If you want to use ECMP, as was said, you've got the fat pseudo-wire system available, and you've got the LSP entropy label available. So there are other ways to do ECMP. Next slide. So there's a process recommendation then. So first off, we need an experienced document shepherd to take over this document, as Andy and I are both authors, and Matthew told me over the break that he would do this. Matthew, of course, is perfectly suitable, is eminently suitable, and we're thankful that he's picked it up.
That's Matthew Bocci, who is a former PW3 chair.
So then I think I'd like to start the formal adoption process immediately after this meeting. It's my view as both an author and an experienced chair that the draft is perfectly acceptable to come under working group control. As an editor, I will obey the consensus of the working group. So I think the right thing to do is to adopt it. That sends an important message to our colleagues in the IEEE that we're taking the problem seriously. Ideally, I'd like this to be with the IESG by Singapore. So maybe we could try for a record in the working group. Next slide, please. Why the rush? A number of operators have raised this problem with us. The IEEE liaison has raised it with the IESG. Our AD has asked us to fix the problem. The fix is relatively simple. We'll spend more time discussing the context and the limitations than we will the solution. So I think we should do it. I think that's the last slide.
Yes.
Okay. So we'll hand it over to Matthew Bocci, for to start the process. Clearly, if people don't think we should adopt it, we won't. But I think there's a really good commercial case, a really good case for the IETF to be seen as a good citizen, and so we should pick this up.
Okay. Just before we move on to the next presentation, who has not yet signed the blue sheets?
I want to say something. So as this gets adopted, I would strongly recommend that we send a liaison to some of the folks that use RFC 48, whatever it was, 4448, because and let them know about this problem, because they're going to have corresponding updates in their documents.
Right. Well, we should certainly do a liaison to the people who use this, the other standards bodies that use this service, to make sure that they are aware of this change. Yes.
Okay, very good. And you can help us draft the liaison, Dave? Okay, great. Thank you very much. Okay, with that, we have one more item on the agenda. And that's a Yang data model for pseudowires. Okay, Ryan.
Yeah, I'm Fang Wei from JT, not Chen Ran.
Oh, okay,
Yeah.
okay, Fang Wei.
Yeah. So this is the procedural Yang data model.
Okay, here.
Thank you. So the milestone of pairs shows that we need a young data model for a single segment proceed while and multi-segment proceed while. So we finish this draft to catch the milestone of PALS. We define the young data model for proceed while configuration and operation. So next.
Okay.
Yeah, I think we define the single segment proceed while and multi-segment proceed while, and the emulation type we define the TDM, frame, FR, ATM, etc. So we think that the proceed while should be augmented by R2 VPN. So this is the tree structure for the proceed while. There are two parts. The first is single segment proceed while, and the second is multi-segment proceed while. For the single segment proceed while, we define the name, pure IP, and control word. And
Fenway? Yeah, it's in front of you there. Yeah.
It's too small.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, and also we define the interface node and the name and the MTU belong to the interface node, and also the VCCV parameter, and also the emulation type we define TDM, FR, and ATM. So under the procedure while type, we support RDP procedure while and static procedure while. For the multi-segment procedure while, we define the name and the procedure while segment A and the procedure segment C. Okay, so this is the tree structure of the draft. Yeah.
Okay.
So this is very simple.
Okay.
Yeah.
So I have a comment. This is Himanshu from Siena.
Yeah.
So this is almost all of it is covered in the L2 VPN Yang data model. I mean, there is a lot of overlap here. The mostly we have concentrated with Ethernet pseudo-wire in L2 VPN Yang model. And the multi-segment part is not there. But many of these other attributes are all covered. And now pseudo-wire is a separate container. So I would recommend extending that rather than doing a different Yang tree for pseudo-wire in a different working group altogether.
Yeah, so Fenway, as I pointed out in email to Ran, there is an existing working group draft in the best working group, which is the L2 VPN Yang model. That's what Himanshu was just referring to. This is ongoing work, and it may be better, rather than doing a separate draft here, to take your work and merge that in with the ongoing work that's going on in the best working group.
Yes.
Yeah, I think this is the one choice. So how about move the procedure while to the PALS work group?
Yes. Well, for the case of doing pseudo-wire modeling, the best working group has already done almost all the work already.
Yeah.
So it doesn't really make sense to have two separate divergent models for the same constructs.
Yes. It doesn't make sense.
Yeah. So that's okay. So
yes.
So we can move the multi-segment procedure while to the R VPN model. And,
yes, absolutely.
Yeah. That would be the right thing to do.
I mean, you can write a draft describing the update that needs to happen. Hopefully the authors of the other draft will take this into account.
or just send them text.
So sorry, I didn't. Yeah, I'm the author of the L2VPN. There's a whole group of people that are working on the L2VPN Yang model in the BEST working group. And just recently we forked out the pseudowire, separate container, and have all this, almost all of this information in there. Now the parts that are missing is, like I said, we were concentrating more on the Ethernet, but the pseudowire types like ATM and frame relay, and those can be easily added. And the multi-segment pseudowire part.
Do you have a multi-segment procedure wire?
Right. So the right thing to do is for the authors of this draft to send to the BEST working group text that they think should be incorporated.
Yes. Yes.
And if the two of you could get together and talk, and
Yes.
they make that happen, that'd be great. Yeah.
Yes. We can.
Oh,
Patrice is here also. Yes. We'll just coordinate that.
Okay.
Okay, thank you very much. Is there anyone else who has not yet signed a blue sheet? In that case, we are done. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for attending this exclusive meeting. Inclusive exclusive meeting.
Enjoy your evening.